The clatter of ceramic on linoleum was the soundtrack to Clara's life. At 24, she was a connoisseur of the subtle symphonies of the Starlight Diner, a chrome and vinyl relic off a forgotten highway in upstate New York. She knew the weary sigh of the coffee machine, the impatient tap of a trucker's spoon, the low murmur of secrets shared over lukewarm pie. But the silence that walked in on a Tuesday night was a sound she'd never heard before. He was a man carved from granite and old money, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the diner itself. His watch, a sliver of platinum and dark leather, caught the tired fluorescent light and threw it back with contempt. Clara felt a familiar flutter in her chest, the desperate hope of a game-changing tip, the kind that could finally get the specialist to see her grandmother, the kind that could put a dent in the mountain of medical bills that grew larger with every rasping breath her nana took. He ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, a New York strip, and a bottle of mineral water that Jerry had to dust off from the back shelf. He ate with a cold, methodical precision, his eyes never leaving the rain-streaked window. He racked up a tab of $387.50, a small fortune in a place where most checks barely broke $20. And then he was gone, a ghost in tailored wool, leaving nothing but the faint, clean scent of bergamot and the crushing weight of expectation. Clara rushed to the table, her apron strings flying. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope. Please let it be enough, just for this month. Instead, nestled beside the half-empty water glass, were two crisp, solitary $1 bills, a $2 tip from a man who could buy the whole damn block. The air rushed out of her lungs. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration, a statement of her worth. Tears, hot and furious, pricked at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to scream, to run out into the rain and throw the bills in his face. She snatched the heavy plate, her knuckles white, ready to slam it into the bus tub and shatter the illusion of her own hope. But as her fingers cooled under the rim, they brushed against something smooth and foreign. It was a small, flat object, secured to the underside with a piece of clear tape. Not just a note. It was a key card, the kind used for high-end hotels, and beneath it, a tiny folded piece of paper. The message scrawled on it in sharp, urgent handwriting would not just change her night, it would detonate her entire life. The rain in Hudson Falls didn't wash away the past. It just made the memories slick and treacherous. It was 10:15 p.m., the hour when the neon starlight sign flickered like a failing heartbeat against the bruised twilight sky. The air inside was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 meals, stale coffee, atomized grease, the faint sweetness of yesterday's cherry pie. That smell had seeped into the fabric of Clara's worn cardigan, a scent she knew she'd carry with her long after her shift ended. She was wiping down the counter for the 10th time, a mindless, repetitive motion that kept the panic at bay. At 24, she possessed the bone-deep weariness of someone who had been a caregiver for a decade. Her grandmother, Eleanor, was the center of her universe, a woman whose laugh once filled every room, now confined to a small apartment, tethered to an oxygen tank, her lungs slowly turning to stone from a disease the doctors called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. A fancy name for a slow, suffocating death. The digital clock above the grill was a tyrant, ticking away the minutes until she could go home, count her meager tips, and face the reality of another overdue bill for another experimental medication that wasn't working. The bell above the door chimed, a tinny, cheerful sound that was utterly at odds with the man who entered. Clara didn't look up. Kitchens closed, coffee and pie only. I'm not here for the food." The voice was a low baritone, cultured and quiet, yet it cut through the diner's ambient hum like a scalpel. Clara looked up, and her practiced waitress smile faltered. The man was an apparition from another world. The Starlight was a haven for factory workers, long-haul truckers, and teenagers with nowhere else to go. It was not a place for men like Alistair Finch. She recognized him instantly. Not as a customer, but as a local legend, a phantom. His family had built this town, owned the now-shuttered textile mills, the very mills where her grandfather had worked himself into an early grave. Finch was a recluse, a billionaire who hadn't been seen publicly in years, rumored to live in a sprawling, Gothic estate on the cliffs overlooking the Hudson River. He was older than the newspaper photos suggested, his hair a shock of silver, his face a roadmap of deep lines. But his eyes were a startling, piercing blue, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. He wore a charcoal wool coat that seemed to absorb the light, and beneath it a suit of impeccable cut. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, his presence shrinking the small diner. "A booth," he said, his gaze sweeping the room, noting the exits, the other patrons, a lone trucker nursing a coffee, two teens sharing fries. The one in the corner. Clara grabbed a menu out of habit, her hand trembling slightly. His cologne, a subtle mix of sandalwood and something like old paper, followed him as he slid into the darkest booth, his back to the wall. Why was a man who could dine anywhere in the world sitting in a failing diner on a Tuesday night? She poured him coffee, her movements stiff and self-conscious. "What can I get for you, sir?" "The New York strip. Rare. And a bottle of San Pellegrino." He didn't even glance at the menu. It was then she noticed the slight tremor in his own hand as he reached for the cup, the almost imperceptible pallor beneath his tanned skin. She served him with a detached efficiency she'd perfected over the years. She didn't hover. Men like him, she imagined, despised being hovered over. She refilled his water glass before it was empty. She brought extra napkins. In her mind, the frantic calculus had begun. A man like that, a standard tip is an insult. Maybe he'll leave 100, maybe 500. The thought was a dangerous, intoxicating spark. It would cover Nana's prescription. It would pay for the portable oxygen concentrator she needs to leave the house. The hope was a physical thing, a tightness in her chest. As he finished the last of his steak, he finally looked at her again. Truly looked. His eyes weren't just seeing a waitress. They were scanning, analyzing. His gaze lingered on her name tag. Clara. Then dropped to the sketchbook, peeking out of her apron pocket. "You still draw?" he asked, his voice soft. Clara froze, the coffee pot in her hand wavering. I'm sorry?" "Your mother, Sarah, she used to say you had the sight, that you could capture a person's soul with a piece of charcoal." He gestured to the sketchbook. "She was a weaver at my family's mill, one of the best. She had your eyes." Clara's heart felt like it had stopped. Her mother had died in a car crash when Clara was 14, a tragedy that had shattered her world and left her in Eleanor's care. She had worked at the Finch mill, just like her grandfather. How could this man remember her mother, a line worker from 2 decades ago? "You knew my mother," she whispered. Finch wiped his mouth with a napkin, his movements precise, final. He didn't answer her question. Instead he said, "The world is not what it seems, Clara. Details matter. The things people overlook. That's where the truth is." He dropped the napkin onto the plate. "Check, please." The spell was broken. The moment of connection, if it had ever existed, vanished. He was once again the cold, distant billionaire. Clara's mind reeled. She printed the check, $387.50, including a bottle of wine he'd ordered and barely touched. She placed it on the table, her hands unsteady. He produced a wallet of worn alligator skin and laid 4 $100 bills on the table. "Keep the change," she started to say, the words catching in her throat. "No," Finch said, his voice firm, almost cold. "Bring me my change, every penny." The request was a slap. Humiliation burned its way up her neck. She walked back to the register, her face flaming, and counted out $13.50. When she returned, Finch was standing, shrugging on his heavy coat. He took the $10 bill, the 3 ones, and the 2 quarters. Then, with deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, he placed 2 of the single dollar bills back on the table. $2 on a nearly $400 tab, from a man who knew her mother. He walked out into the rain without another word, without a backward glance. Clara stared at the 2 crumpled bills. The rage was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. It wasn't just cheap. It was a calculated act of cruelty. It was a message. You, your memory, your hope, it's all worth nothing. Tears welled, hot and angry. She grabbed the plate, the desire to smash it into a million pieces overwhelming her. "Jerk," she mouthed, the word a bitter taste. She tilted the plate to scrape the remains into the bin. And that's when she saw it. Taped to the underside of the heavy ceramic, shielded from the steak juice and grease, was a hotel key card for the Albany Grand. Taped next to it, a small, folded piece of heavy, cream-colored stationery. Her hands shook so violently she almost dropped the plate. She tore the note free. The handwriting was jagged, as if written in a moving car. "The $2 is for their cameras. They need to believe you're insignificant. Your mother's accident wasn't an accident. They're watching me. Soon, they'll be watching you. The Albany Grand, room 1201. Tonight. Trust no one, especially the authorities." Clara looked wildly toward the door where Finch had disappeared. The headlights of a passing truck swept across the diner's windows, and in that brief, illuminating flash, she saw it. A black Lincoln Navigator, idling across the street, its lights off, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a piece on a board she didn't understand, in a game she didn't know she was playing. Clara didn't punch out. She didn't even tell Jerry she was leaving. She ripped off her apron, stuffed it under the counter, and fled through the back door into the alley. The rain was a cold shock, plastering her thin cardigan to her skin, but the fear icing her veins was colder still. Your mother's accident wasn't an accident. The words were a frantic, looping nightmare in her mind. Sarah Boyd had lost control of her car on a rain-slicked road, hitting a tree. The official report cited driver error, a tragic but simple explanation. But her mother had been a cautious driver, a woman who drove 5 miles under the speed limit, even on sunny days. Clara had been 14, too lost in her own grief to question it. Eleanor had been too broken. Who were they? Finch's note had been a command and a warning. Trust no one. She stumbled out of the alley, pulling her collar up against the biting wind. She didn't dare take her own car, a beat-up Civic parked in the diner's lot. If they were watching Finch, they could have seen him talking to her. They might already know who she was. She walked 3 blocks, her sneakers soaked, before hailing a cab, using the crumpled cash tips from her pocket. "The Albany Grand," she told the driver, her voice barely a whisper. She spent the entire ride hunched down in the back seat, peering through the rain-beaded rear window, her heart leaping at every pair of headlights that followed them for more than a block. The Albany Grand was a monument to a more elegant time, its marble lobby and gilded ceilings a stark contrast to the gritty reality of her life. She felt desperately out of place, her damp clothes and diner scent marking her as an intruder. She clutched the keycard in her pocket, the plastic cool and solid against her sweaty palm. Room 1201, the penthouse suite. She bypassed the front desk, heading straight for the elevators, keeping her head down. The ride to the 12th floor was agonizingly slow, the soft muzak, a surreal soundtrack to the terror churning in her gut. The hallway was silent, carpeted in a thick, plush navy that swallowed the sound of her footsteps. Room 1201 was at the very end of the hall. She stood before the heavy oak door for a long moment, her breath held tight in her chest. What was she walking into? A trap? A rescue? She slid the keycard into the slot. The light blinked green with a soft, electronic click. She pushed the door open. The suite was dark, the only light spilling from the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, glittering view of the city below. The air was still and smelled of leather and Finch's sandalwood cologne. "Mr. Finch?" she called out, her voice trembling. Silence. She stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind her. She fumbled for a light switch, found one, and flicked it on. The suite was vast and opulent, decorated in shades of charcoal and cream. A half-empty glass of amber liquid sat on a polished mahogany desk, but the room was empty. Then she saw it. On the center of the king-sized bed, placed with deliberate care, was a vintage leather satchel. It was old, the leather cracked and softened with age, the brass buckles tarnished. It looked like something a doctor or a professor might have carried a century ago. Her heart pounding, she approached the bed. The satchel wasn't locked. With trembling fingers, she undid the buckles. Inside were 4 items. First, a stack of cash, all $100 bills, bound with a simple rubber band. It had to be $20,000, a lifeline. Second, a small, state-of-the-art digital audio recorder, its red light blinking faintly. Third, an old, leather-bound journal. And fourth, laid on top of the journal, was a single 8x10 glossy photograph. She picked up the photo first. It was a candid shot, taken at some kind of company picnic years ago. A group of men in shirt sleeves stood laughing around a grill. She recognized a younger Alastair Finch, and standing next to him, with his arm slung casually over Finch's shoulder, was a man she knew all too well from local news reports and charity galas. Marcus Thorne, the current CEO of Viridian Dynamics, the conglomerate that had absorbed the old Finch Mills. Thorne was the smiling, philanthropic face of modern industry in the Hudson Valley. And standing just behind them, half hidden in the shade of a tree, was her mother. She was younger, vibrant, holding a plate of food, a hesitant smile on her face as if she were on the edge of the group, not quite part of it. Clara's breath hitched. She picked up the journal. The leather was worn smooth. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was her mother's, the elegant, familiar cursive she hadn't seen in a decade. It wasn't a diary, it was a log book. Project Nightingale. They're calling it chrysolite, a new insulation fiber. Fire retardant, cheap to produce. Thorne is ecstatic. Mr. Finch seems hesitant. He keeps asking about the preliminary safety reports. Clara felt a chill snake down her spine. She flipped through the pages. Dates, batch numbers, chemical compositions. And then, notes scribbled in the margins. June 12th. 3 lab rats in the initial test group developed respiratory lesions. Dr. Albright called them anomalies. Thorne ordered the study concluded. August 5th. There was a small fire in the processing unit. The men who put it out were coughing for days. I overheard Thorne telling Mr. Finch it was growing pains. September 21st. Grandpa is sick. A terrible cough. The doctor says it's his age. but it's the same dry, hacking cough the men from the fire had. The blood drained from Clara's face. Her grandfather hadn't died of old age. He had died from the mill. And her grandmother, Eleanor, had never worked there, but she'd spent 30 years washing her husband's fiber-dusted clothes. Secondary exposure. The idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. It wasn't idiopathic at all. They had poisoned her family. She flipped to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. November 2nd. I found Dr. Albright's original report, the one Thorne buried. Chrysolite is toxic. It fractures into microscopic needles that embed in the lungs. It's worse than asbestos. I showed it to Mr. Finch. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He promised he would handle it. He told me to go home, to forget what I saw. He said he would protect me. That was the last entry. Her mother had died 2 days later. Finch hadn't protected her. He'd been a coward. He'd let Thorne cover it up. This wasn't just a corporate malfeasance. This was murder, stretching across decades. Suddenly, the digital recorder on the bed crackled to life. It wasn't recording. It was a receiver. A touching reunion, isn't it? The voice was female, smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent of metallic coldness. It came from the recorder, but it felt like it was whispered right in her ear. Your mother was a nuisance, just like Alistair in the end. Clara spun around, her eyes darting to the corners of the dark suite. Who are you? Where are you? I'm everywhere you need me to be, the voice purred. Alistair was a loose end. He got sentimental in his old age. Mr. Thorne dislikes sentimentality. He prefers tidiness. A news alert buzzed on Clara's cheap smartphone. She pulled it out, her thumb slipping on the screen. Breaking news. Billionaire recluse. Alistair Finch found dead in his vehicle near the Hudson River. Police suspect suicide. The timeline was impossible. He'd left the diner less than an hour ago, the Black Navigator. They hadn't been watching him. They had been waiting for him. They had killed him the moment he drove away from the diner. And then, they had let her walk right into his trap. The recorder wasn't a clue he'd left for her. It was a listening device they were using. He led us right to you, the voice continued, confirming her terror. The final loose end. The dutiful daughter. Now, be a good girl, Clara. Leave the satchel on the bed. Walk out of the room, and we can pretend this little trip down memory lane never happened. Your grandmother, Eleanor, isn't it? Such a fragile woman. It would be a shame if her oxygen supply were to be interrupted. The threat, so casually delivered, flipped a switch in Clara's mind. The terror didn't vanish, but it crystallized into something cold and hard. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the one person she had left. She looked at the satchel, at her mother's journal. The proof. She looked at the door. She couldn't run. They were waiting. She was trapped on the 12th floor of a hotel, a ghost in a dead man's room. Her eyes fell on the sketchbook in her apron, the one Finch had mentioned. She always carried it. Drawing was her escape, her way of seeing the world, of noticing the details everyone else missed. And in that moment, her artist's eye, the part of her that saw light and shadow and structure, took over. She scanned the room not as a victim, but as an observer. The heavy velvet curtains, the ornate fireplace, the solid mahogany desk. And then she saw it. A small, almost invisible seam in the wallpaper behind a large bookshelf. It wasn't a floor. It was a door, a service entrance, probably for staff, long since papered over. The voice on the recorder spoke again, a hint of impatience in its silken tone. Your time is running out, Clara. Clara took a deep breath. She reached into the satchel and grabbed the stack of cash. She walked not to the main door, but to the fireplace. With a grunt, she swept a heavy brass statue off the mantelpiece. It crashed onto the marble hearth with a deafening clang. "What was that?" the voice on the recorder snapped. "What are you doing?" Clara didn't answer. She picked up the heavy brass poker from the fireplace stand. She walked to the desk, grabbed her mother's journal, and stuffed it deep into her apron pocket. Then she turned to the bookshelf. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway outside the main door. A keycard slid into the lock. Clara swung the brass poker. It smashed into the plasterboard next to the bookshelf, right where she'd seen the seam. A spiderweb of cracks appeared. The main door burst open. 2 men in dark suits, weapons drawn, filled the doorway. Clara swung again, harder, putting her entire body into it. The plaster shattered, revealing a dark, narrow space behind it. The old service door. "She's in here. Don't let her get away." A woman's voice, the same voice from the recorder, commanded from the hallway. A woman in a sharp black pantsuit, her face pale and severe, stood behind the 2 men, a phone pressed to her ear. Isabella. The cleaner. Clara didn't hesitate. She scrambled through the hole she'd made into the dusty, cramped darkness of the old service corridor. She ran, blind, her hands outstretched, the sound of splintering wood and angry shouts echoing behind her. She wasn't just a waitress running for her life. She was the keeper of a dead woman's truth, and she would not let it be buried again. The service corridor was a lightless, suffocating tube of dust and forgotten time. Clara ran blindly, one hand trailing along the rough plaster wall, the other clutching the journal in her apron pocket. It felt like a warm, solid weight against her hip, a tangible piece of the mother she had lost. Behind her, she could hear the heavy thud of boots and Isabella's sharp, furious commands. The corridor ended abruptly at a steep, narrow spiral staircase, the kind meant for maids and bellhops a century ago. She scrambled down, the iron steps ringing under her sneakers. She emerged into the controlled chaos of the hotel's main kitchen. The air was a blast of heat, steam, and the clatter of pots and pans. Chefs in white coats turned to stare as she burst from the shadows, a wild-eyed apparition in a diner uniform. She didn't stop. She dodged a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes, slid on a patch of spilled olive oil, and shoved her way through the swinging doors into the hotel's grand ballroom, where a political fundraiser was in full swing. The sudden transition was dizzying. She was in a sea of tuxedos and sequined gowns, under the glittering light of crystal chandeliers. Faces turned, conversations faltered. She was a stain on their perfect evening. She saw a security guard near the main entrance turn, his eyes narrowing, his hand going to his earpiece. They were coordinating. They would have all the exits covered. She couldn't go out. She had to go up. She spotted a discreet door marked "Staff Only" and darted through it, finding herself in another, cleaner service hallway. She saw a bank of service elevators and jabbed the up button. An eternity passed. A car arrived with a soft ding. She jumped in, frantically pressing the button for the roof. The doors slid shut just as 2 of Thorne's men rounded the corner. One of them slammed his fist against the closing door in frustration. The roof was a wind-swept expanse of gravel and ventilation units, 30 stories above the glittering city. The rain had stopped, but the wind was fierce, tearing at her clothes. She ran to the edge, her chest heaving. There was nowhere else to go. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. An unknown number. She knew who it was. She answered, her hand shaking. "Clever girl," Isabella's voice said, devoid of its earlier calm. "You've bought yourself a few minutes, but the building is sealed. There is no escape. Give me the journal and I will personally guarantee your grandmother lives to see another sunrise." "Why should I believe you?" Clara gasped, the wind whipping her hair across her face. Because Mr. Thorne values efficiency above all else. A public scandal is inefficient. A quiet resolution is not. The journal for your grandmother's life. It's a simple transaction. Clara's mind raced. They wouldn't kill her grandmother. Not yet. Eleanor was her leverage. As long as they thought they could trade for the journal, Eleanor was safe. But the moment they had it, they were both dead. She needed an ally. Trust no one, especially the authorities. Finch's warning echoed in her head. The police were likely on Thorne's payroll. The media? They'd want proof, verification. It would take too long. Then she remembered the last thing in the satchel. The digital audio recorder. It hadn't just been a receiver. Finch had left it for her. And on the back, scratched into the plastic, was a name and a number. Ben Carter. She hung up on Isabella and quickly dialed the number. It rang 4 times, then went to a gravelly, sleep-thick voicemail. You've reached Ben Carter. I'm probably chasing a deadline or a drink. Leave a message. Beep. Mr. Carter, my name is Clara Boyd. Alistair Finch gave me your number. He's dead. They killed him. They killed my mother, Sarah Boyd, 20 years ago. I have the proof. They're hunting me right now. I'm on the roof of the Albany Grand. Please, I don't know who else to call. She rattled off her own cell number, her voice cracking with desperation, and hung up. It was a Hail Mary, a message in a bottle thrown into an ocean of silence. Who was Ben Carter? A lawyer? A friend? The heavy door to the roof access stairs slammed open. Isabella stood there, flanked by her 2 thugs. She wasn't smiling. The direct approach, then, Isabella said, taking a step forward. Give it to me, Clara. Don't make this unpleasant. Clara backed away, her heels catching on the loose gravel of the roof's edge. The wind howled around her. Below, the city was a tapestry of indifferent lights. She clutched the journal to her chest. Just then, her phone rang. Not Isabella this time. It was the number she had just called. She answered it, her eyes locked on Isabella. Hello? This is Ben Carter. The voice on the other end was rough, wary. This had better not be a prank, kid. Alistair Finch is ancient history. He's dead, Clara said, her voice steady now, fueled by a last, desperate surge of adrenaline. Murdered an hour ago. I have my mother's journal. It details the cover-up of Project Nightingale at the Finch Mill, the chrysolite insulation. It's poison, and Viridian Dynamics has been selling it for 20 years. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Chrysolite. My God. I chased that story a decade ago. They called me a conspiracy theorist. They ruined me. The voice was no longer just wary. It was electric with a sudden, dangerous focus. Where are you? The roof of the Albany Grand. They have me cornered. Stall them, Ben Carter said. Stall them for 5 minutes. I'm closer than you think. The line went dead. Isabella was only 20 feet away now. Who was that? It doesn't matter. It's over. Clara held up the journal. You want this? You'll have to explain to your boss why the whole world is about to see it. She held her phone up, its screen facing Isabella, pretending it was live streaming. It was a bluff, a pathetic one, but it was all she had. Isabella actually hesitated. The threat of a scandal, however remote, was programmed into her. She glanced at her men. That split second of hesitation was all it took. From the street below, a deafening siren suddenly erupted. Not a police siren, but the high-pitched wail of a fire alarm. Then, the entire block was plunged into darkness. The street lights, the hotel's glowing sign, the traffic lights. Everything went black. Isabella swore, spinning around. One of her men spoke into his wrist. We have a power outage. The whole grid is down. In the sudden, disorienting darkness, illuminated only by the distant city glow, a new sound emerged, the whirring buzz of a commercial drone. It rose from the street below, a small, dark shape with a single, bright LED light. It hovered just off the edge of the roof, its camera lens pointed directly at them. A voice, amplified and distorted, boomed from a speaker on the drone. "Smile for the camera, Isabella. The Viridian Dynamics death ledger is about to go viral." Isabella's professional composure finally shattered. "Shoot it down!" she screamed at her men. But it was too late. The distraction was all Clara needed. She wasn't aiming for the door. She was aiming for the fire escape she'd spotted on the side of the building when she first ran out. She sprinted, the journal clutched in her hand, and threw herself over the parapet, her feet finding the iron rungs of the ladder. She scrambled down into the darkness, the sound of useless gunshots echoing in the night air above her. She didn't know who Ben Carter was, but he had just saved her life. The war had just begun. The alley behind the Albany Grand smelled of wet dumpsters and fried food. Clara landed the last 10 feet from the fire escape in a jarring crouch, her ankles screaming in protest. The darkness was a thick, comforting blanket. A side door of a neighboring building creaked open, and a hand shot out, grabbing her arm. She flinched, crying out, but a low voice hissed, "Easy, kid. I'm the guy with the drone." He pulled her into a dark hallway. He was a silhouette against the faint light from the alley, but she could make out a man in his late 50s, with a haggard face, a beat-up leather jacket, and the weary eyes of someone who had lost too many fights. He held a large, complicated-looking remote control in his other hand. "Ben Carter," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "And you must be Clara Boyd." He looked her up and down. "You got the book?" Clara nodded, clutching her apron pocket. "The journal. It's all here." "How did you—" "The power, the drone." Carter let out a short, bitter laugh. "I live a block from here, in a 5th-floor walk-up that overlooks the hotel. When you said roof, I got lucky. As for the power grid, let's just say I still have a few friends in low places who owe me favors. Old hackers who enjoy a little chaos." He peered out into the alley. "They'll have people swarming the ground level in minutes. We need to move. Now." He led her through a maze of back corridors, out another door, and into a different alley. His car, a dented, ancient sedan that looked like it ran on fumes and sheer stubbornness, was parked with 2 wheels on the curb. They jumped in, and he tore off into the darkened streets, driving by instinct. "So, chrysolite," Carter said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I knew it. I had a source inside Viridian's R&D department 10 years ago. A chemist named Albright. He was terrified. He told me they had faked the safety data, that the stuff was a carcinogen. I wrote the story. My editor killed it, said it was unsubstantiated. 2 weeks later, Albright died of a heart attack. He was 42. They smeared my name, called me a reckless sensationalist, and got me fired. I've been writing freelance obituaries and chasing UFO stories ever since." The name clicked in Clara's memory. Dr. Albright called them anomalies. "He's in the journal," she said, her voice shaking. "My mother wrote about him. She knew he was scared." Carter slammed his palm on the steering wheel. Vindication. After all these years. He glanced at her, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "I'm sorry about your mother, kid. She must have been brave." "She was," Clara whispered, "and they killed her for it." They drove in silence for a while, the only sounds the rattling of the car's engine and the distant wail of restored sirens. Carter took them to his apartment, a cramped space above a pawn shop that smelled of stale whiskey and paper. Stacks of newspapers and files rose from the floor like stalagmites. The walls were covered in corkboards, interconnected with a chaotic web of strings, photos, and handwritten notes. a testament to a decade of obsession. The chrysolite story was the sun around which his broken world orbited. "Okay," he said, clearing a space on a table littered with empty mugs. "Let's see it." Clara carefully removed the journal and placed it on the table. For a man who had just seen the proof he'd sought for a decade, Carter was surprisingly methodical. He didn't crow in victory. He put on a pair of reading glasses, handled the book with an almost reverent care, and began to read. He was silent for nearly an hour, his face a mask of grim concentration, occasionally letting out a low whistle or a muttered curse. "This is it," he finally said, looking up, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made him look 10 years younger. "This isn't just a smoking gun, kid. This is a nuke. Your mother's notes, the batch numbers, the dates. It corroborates everything Albright told me. It's a direct link to Marcus Thorne and his father before him." He stood up and began to pace. "But we have a problem, a big one. This journal is just paper and ink. Thorne's lawyers will tear it apart. They'll claim it's a forgery, that your mother was a disgruntled employee. It's your word, the word of a dead chemist, and a disgraced journalist against $1 billion corporation." "So what do we do?" Clara asked, the hope that had carried her this far beginning to fray. "We don't play their game," Carter said, a cunning glint in his eye. "We don't go to the press or the DA. Thorne owns half of them. We change the battlefield. We need more than proof. We need a confession." His phone rang, a shrill, jarring sound. He glanced at the caller ID, and his face darkened. He answered, putting it on speaker. "I'm impressed, Carter." Isabella's cool voice filled the room. "I should have known you'd be sniffing around this. Still tilting at windmills after all these years." "Go to hell, Isabella," Carter growled. "Such language. I'm simply calling to propose a new transaction. We know you have the girl, and we know you have the journal. But we have something you want." There was a pause, then the sound of a door opening, and a weak, familiar voice. "Clara!" Clara shot to her feet, her blood turning to ice. "Nana!" "Clara, baby, what's going on? These people, they say you're in trouble." Her grandmother's voice was thin, punctuated by the soft hiss of her oxygen machine. "Let her go!" Clara screamed into the phone. "The terms are simple," Isabella said, her voice returning, cold and businesslike. "The journal for the old woman. There's a place Thorne's family used to own. The old St. Gregory Hotel out on the bluffs. It's been abandoned for years. A fittingly derelict place for this to end. Midnight. Come alone, Carter. Just you and the book. The girl stays behind. Any tricks, any more drones or power outages, and Mrs. Roosevelt's final hours will be unpleasant." The line went dead. Clara stared at the phone in horror, then at Carter. "They have her. We have to give them the journal." "No," Carter said, his voice quiet but firm. "Don't you see? This is the trap. You give them that book, and you, me, and your grandmother are all dead by sunrise. They don't leave witnesses." He looked around his cluttered apartment, at the monument to his own failure. "But they've made a mistake. They've given us the location, and they've given us the time." He started moving with a sudden, frantic purpose, pulling old equipment from dusty boxes, a parabolic microphone, a night vision camera, a tangle of wires. "What are you doing?" Clara asked, her heart hammering. "They want a meeting. We'll give them a meeting," Carter said, his face set in grim lines. "Thorne will be there. He's too arrogant to let a subordinate handle the final victory. He'll want to see my face when I hand over the book that proves he's a monster." He handed Clara a small earpiece. "You're not staying behind. I need you. I need your eyes. You see details, right? Finch told you that. When we get there, You're going to be my spotter. You're going to look for anything out of place, anything they might use against us." He paused, looking at her, his expression deadly serious. "But I'm going into that hotel, and I'm going to make Marcus Thorne confess to everything. And this time, the whole world is going to be listening." The St. Gregory Hotel was a skeletal ruin, silhouetted against a moonless sky. Perched on the edge of the Hudson Palisades, it had once been a grand resort for the city's elite, built by Marcus Thorne's grandfather. Now, its windows were vacant eyes, its grand facade scarred by graffiti and decay. It was a tombstone for a bygone era, and tonight it felt like a tombstone for them. Ben parked his car in a grove of skeletal trees a half-mile away. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and river water. He laid out his equipment on the hood of the car, a motley collection of outdated but functional spy gear. "Okay," he said, his voice a low whisper, as he fitted an earpiece into Clara's ear. "I'm going in the front door. They'll expect that. They'll search me, find me clean. The journal," he tapped a thick manila envelope, "is a fake. Pages from an old phone book. The real one is tucked in the lining of my jacket. They won't find it unless they strip search me, and Thorne's ego won't allow for that kind of delay." He handed her a pair of high-powered binoculars with a night vision setting. "You're going to circle around to the east, up on that ridge." He pointed to a dark rise overlooking the hotel's rear and side. "You'll have a clear view of the grand ballroom. That's where they'll do the exchange. I need you to be my eyes. Count how many men. Note their positions. Look for anything unusual. A sniper, a secondary exit they might use. You see something, you tell me. No heroics. You are a ghost. Understood?" Clara nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The weight of the binoculars felt immense. "This wire," Ben said, tapping a tiny microphone pinned to his collar, "is live. It's broadcasting on a secure, short-wave frequency to a receiver in the car, which is then rerouting it to a server I have hidden in a very safe place. If all goes well, by the time I walk out of there, Thorne's confession will be uploading to every major news desk and social media platform on the planet." He looked at her, his face etched with the gravity of the moment. "Clara, if this goes south, if they find the real journal, or if they make a move before I can get him talking, get in the car and drive. Don't look back. Get the server logs to the one person I trust at the New York Times. Her name is—" "No," Clara interrupted, her voice firm, surprising them both. "We both walk out. With my grandmother." A flicker of something, respect, perhaps, passed through Ben's tired eyes. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Okay, kid. Let's go hunt a dragon." He vanished into the darkness toward the hotel's main entrance. Clara, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest, began the trek up the muddy ridge. She found a spot concealed by a thicket of overgrown rhododendrons, offering a perfect, if distant, view into the cavernous, derelict ballroom. The once magnificent room was a wreck. Plaster dust coated everything, and the remnants of a massive crystal chandelier lay shattered on the floor like a fallen star. In the center of the room, a single, harsh work light illuminated a small area. She saw her grandmother, frail and terrified, sitting in a wheelchair. Isabella stood beside her, impassive and still. Two of Thorne's thugs stood by the main doors. A third was positioned near a crumbling side staircase. 3 guards, plus Isabella. She whispered the details into the small mic attached to her collar. "I see them, Ben. 3 guards, plus the woman. Nana looks okay. Scared, but okay." "Copy that." Ben's voice crackled in her ear. "I'm going in." Through the binoculars, she watched as the main doors opened and Ben walked in, his hands raised. The 2 guards converged on him, patting him down roughly. They took the fake journal, checked it briefly, and handed it to Isabella. A moment later, Marcus Thorne emerged from the shadows. He was impeccably dressed in a cashmere coat, looking utterly out of place in the ruin. He radiated an aura of smug, absolute power. "Carter," Thorne said, his voice echoing in the vast space, clearly audible through Ben's wire. "I have to admit, I'm surprised you had this much fight left in you. I thought we retired you years ago." "You tried," Ben's voice was steady, "but some stories just refuse to die." Thorne chuckled. He took the fake journal from Isabella and flipped through it. "A phone book, really, Ben? After all this time, I expected more creativity." He tossed the envelope aside. "The real one, please. Let's not prolong this." "First, the woman," Ben said. "Let her go. My fight is with you, Thorne. It always has been." "She is the insurance," Thorne said smoothly. "Insurance that you'll be sensible." He walked over to Eleanor's wheelchair and placed a hand on her shoulder. Eleanor flinched. Such a shame. This disease. This terrible random disease. If only my company's generous philanthropic fund for respiratory illness had been established sooner. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Clara felt a surge of pure hatred. "It wasn't random, and you know it." Ben's voice was a low growl. "It was chrysolite. You poisoned these people for profit. You and your father. You killed Dr. Albright, and you killed Sarah Boyd when she got too close." Thorne actually smiled. "Allegations. Nothing but the ravings of a washed-up reporter." "Where is your proof, Ben?" "Oh, that's right. It's in a little journal I'm about to acquire. Once I have that, the story dies for good. Along with anyone who knows it." He snapped his fingers. "The real journal, Ben. Or I have my associate here demonstrate just how fragile old ladies can be." Isabella took a step closer to Eleanor. This was it. The moment of truth. All right, Ben said, his voice laced with defeat. He reached slowly into the inside of his jacket. But Clara wasn't watching the exchange anymore. Her artist's eye, the part of her that saw structure and stress, light and shadow, was scanning the room. She was looking at the ceiling above Thorne. The hotel was old, built in the early 20th century. The ballroom ceiling was an ornate, coffered disaster, with huge sections of plaster missing. But the heavy oak beams that formed the structure were still there. And one of them, directly above where Thorne was standing, was different. It was darker, stained with decades of water damage from a leaky roof. At its main joint, where it met the support wall, she could see a long, jagged crack in the surrounding stone. A stress fracture, a critical point of failure. "Ben," she whispered urgently into the mic. "The ceiling, above Thorne. There's a massive oak beam. It's damaged. Water rot. The joint is cracked." There was a pause. Then, Ben's voice, almost inaudible. "How bad?" "It looks unstable, like a strong vibration could bring it down." Ben's hand was still in his jacket. Thorne was watching him, a predator savoring the kill. "Any last words, Carter?" Thorne mocked. "Just one," Ben said. He pulled his hand out of his jacket. He wasn't holding the journal. He was holding a small, powerful flare gun. "What the hell is that?" Thorne snarled. Ben didn't answer. He didn't aim it at Thorne. He aimed it at the ceiling. "Ben, no!" Clara screamed into the mic, realizing his plan. He fired. The flare, a magnesium-white star, shot across the ballroom and struck the wall right next to the cracked, water-damaged joint of the massive oak beam. The impact, combined with the intense, sudden heat, was all it took. With a deep, groaning crack that echoed like a gunshot, the joint shattered. The massive beam, a ton of solid, century-old oak, ripped free from the ceiling. Thorne looked up, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. He had just enough time to scream before the beam crashed down, missing him by inches but slamming into the floor right in front of him, bringing a shower of plaster and debris with it. It didn't hit him, but it completely blocked his path to Ben and Eleanor, creating a wall of splintered wood and dust. The thugs, stunned by the sudden chaos, raised their weapons. But Ben was already moving. In the confusion, he grabbed the handles of Eleanor's wheelchair and sprinted not for the main doors, but for the crumbling side staircase the third guard had been watching. He shoved the guard, who was still looking at the ceiling, out of the way and disappeared with Eleanor down the dark stairwell. Isabella recovered first. "He's getting away! Get them!" she shrieked, her voice shrill with fury. But Clara was already scrambling down the ridge, her heart pounding with a terrifying, triumphant beat. Ben hadn't just created a diversion. He had created an escape, and he had done it because she had seen a detail no one else had. The aftermath was not a clean, cinematic victory. It was a messy, frantic, and terrifying scramble for survival. As Ben disappeared down the stairwell with Eleanor, Isabella's two remaining men opened fire, their gunshots echoing like cannon fire in the cavernous ballroom. Plaster and stone chips exploded from the walls around the stairwell entrance. From the other side of the fallen beam, Marcus Thorne was screaming, his voice a cocktail of rage and panic. "Get them! I want that journal and I want Carter's head!" Clara, meanwhile, was sprinting through the woods, her lungs burning. She reached the back of the hotel, a crumbling facade of brick and ivy. A service door, its lock long rusted away, hung ajar at the bottom of the stairwell. A moment later, Ben burst out, pushing Eleanor's wheelchair. Eleanor was weeping, her small frame trembling, but she was alive. "The car, go!" Ben yelled, glancing back toward the hotel. They had 100-yard head start across the muddy, overgrown lawn that led to the woods where the car was hidden. Lights flashed inside the hotel as Thorne's men searched for another way out. They reached the car, breathless and splattered with mud. Ben practically threw Eleanor into the passenger seat, folding her wheelchair and shoving it in the back. Clara jumped in beside it, just as Ben turned the key. The old engine sputtered, coughed, and died. "No, no, no, not now," Ben grunted, turning the key again. Behind them, two figures burst from the hotel's main entrance, Isabella and one of her men, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They were running toward them. The engine caught on the third try with a roar. Ben slammed the car into gear, and they fishtailed out of the tree line, mud spraying from the tires. A gunshot cracked through the night, and the rear windshield exploded, showering Clara in a cascade of tempered glass. She ducked down, her arms over her head, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. Ben drove like a maniac, without headlights, navigating the winding country road from memory. "Did you get it?" Clara shouted over the roar of the engine and the wind whistling through the shattered window. "Did you get the confession?" Ben spared a glance from the road, a grim, triumphant smile on his face. Every last self-incriminating word. From the moment I walked in, to the moment he screamed my name as the roof came down. It's all pristine audio. He tapped the dashboard where his phone was mounted. It's been uploading for the last 5 minutes. By the time they figure out what happened, it will be everywhere. The upload was not instantaneous. The resolution was not a single, glorious moment of justice. It was a slow, grinding, and ultimately more satisfying process. Ben's audio file, raw and undeniable, landed in the inbox of a dozen trusted journalists just before dawn. The first online articles appeared an hour later, cautious at first, then gaining momentum as other outlets corroborated the story. By 9 a.m., Viridian Dynamics and Marcus Thorne were trending on every social media platform. The stock began to plummet. Thorne and Isabella were apprehended, not in a dramatic shootout, but by a pair of state troopers at a gas station 60 miles away, trying to pay for fuel with a mud-caked credit card. Thorne, stripped of his power and his tailored suit now ruined, looked like just another pathetic man on the run. The legal battle that followed was monumental. Viridian Dynamics threw an army of lawyers at the case, attempting to discredit the recording, Ben and Clara. But the journal, authenticated by forensic experts, was irrefutable. And soon, emboldened by the public outcry, other former employees began to come forward, corroborating the story of the cover-up. Alistair Finch, it turned out, had planned for his own demise. His will contained a final, explosive directive. In the event of his death being ruled anything other than natural, a sealed package was to be delivered to the U.S. Attorney's office. It contained a full, notarized confession of his own complicity, detailing every bribe, every falsified report, and every politician whose silence had been bought. He had spent his final days not just seeking a way to warn Clara, but building the guillotine for the empire he had helped create. His estate, valued in the billions, was converted into a massive charitable trust. It had two primary functions: to fund the largest class action lawsuit in the state's history on behalf of the chrysolite victims, and to provide lifetime medical care for every affected family. Clara did not receive a massive, life-changing check. She received something far more valuable. One afternoon, a month after the night at the St. Gregory, a lawyer from the trust visited her and Eleanor in their small apartment. He didn't bring money. He brought a deed. The trust had purchased their entire apartment building, retrofitting it with state-of-the-art medical facilities and air filtration systems, turning it into a sanctuary for a dozen other families from the neighborhood suffering from the same mysterious respiratory illnesses. Eleanor, now receiving the best care imaginable, began to breathe easier. The color returned to her cheeks. She started laughing again, a sound Clara realized she hadn't truly heard in years. Ben Carter didn't just get his old job back. He was given his own investigative unit at the New York Times, funded by a grant from a Press Freedom Foundation. He became a legend, the grizzled old dog who finally brought down the wolf. But he never lost the weary look in his eyes, a constant reminder of the cost of truth. 6 months later, Clara stood in a place she never imagined she would be, a hearing room in Washington, D.C., before a Senate subcommittee on corporate malfeasance. She wasn't wearing her waitress uniform. She was in a simple, dark blue dress, her hair pulled back, her demeanor calm and composed. She wasn't there as a victim. She was there as the lead witness. She spoke for nearly an hour, her voice clear and steady, never faltering. She didn't just recount the events of that terrifying night. She told them about her grandfather, about the men who coughed themselves to death, about her mother's quiet courage, and about her grandmother's fight to breathe. As she finished, a senator from Vermont looked down at her. "Miss Boyd, you've been through an unimaginable ordeal. What is it you hope to achieve by being here today?" Clara paused, looking out at the cameras and the faces of the powerful men and women before her. She reached into the portfolio in front of her and pulled out a piece of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was a charcoal sketch. She had drawn it the night before. It was a portrait of Alistair Finch, not as the cold billionaire in the diner, but as she imagined he was in his final moments, a man haunted by regret, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for redemption. She held it up. "I'm here because details matter," she said, her voice echoing the words of the man who had started it all. "The things people overlook, the people overlook. My mother was a weaver. My grandmother washed clothes. I was a waitress. We were insignificant, And because of that, a man like Marcus Thorne believed he could erase us, that our lives were worth less than his profit margins. I'm here to make sure that no one is ever considered insignificant again." She put the drawing down and looked directly into the main camera, speaking not to the senators, but to the world. "And I'm here to say that it all started with a $2 tip. It was meant as an insult. It was meant to show me I was worthless." But he was wrong. A small, real smile finally touched her lips, a smile of pure, unadulterated strength. It turned out to be the best investment he ever made.